Welcome to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we are taking a really close, objective look at a fascinating piece of modern political strategy. We're going to break down a recent midterm bootcamp video from Promethean Pack. Now, what's so compelling about this source material is that it outlines a major proposed shift in both political strategy and economic theory, and they're pushing this precisely 3 months ahead of the 2026 elections. So why should you care? Well, because these are the exact types of strategies that end up dictating the political ads, the debates, and the messaging you're going to be hearing nonstop for the next 2 years. The speaker in this video lays out a comprehensive plan to pivot away from traditional campaign talking points and move toward a highly specific, production-based economic message. Whether you're a political junkie, an economics fan, or just kind of curious about how campaign narratives get built from the ground up, there is a lot to unpack here regarding how this pack envisions the modern political landscape. Let's get into it.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the 2026 midterm strategy itself. Second, we'll define what they call the American system. Third, we'll look at the rise of AI-proof jobs. And finally, we'll cover their economic argument on production versus inflation.
Section 1, the 2026 midterm strategy, and moving beyond the old playbook.
With just 3 months left on the clock until the midterms, the speaker is stressing absolute urgency. They're calling for a complete overhaul in how candidates approach voters on the campaign trail, and they explicitly warn against using the old playbook. They argue that simply treating opponents like piñatas, jumping up and down and just attacking them as socialists or communists without offering actual solutions, is a total trap that's going to lead straight to failure, because voters are hurting from decades of de-industrialization. So candidates have to offer the new strategy, and that means a positive, concrete economic solution centered around industry, manufacturing, and the workers themselves. It's a massive pivot from purely negative attacks over to a proactive, production-based vision.
Now, what's really interesting is how they anchor this new strategy. The pack points to a recent interview Donald Trump did with a Michigan host named Steve Gruber. When asked if the Republican Party has turned into the party of the working class, Trump said, "It's the party of the worker. The Republican Party is a much bigger party than it was, let's say, 10 years ago." The speaker in our source video actually uses this specific exchange to define the shifting identity of the party. They're making the case that this isn't just a convenient talking point, but a fundamental redefinition of the battle lines for the 2026 midterms, moving away from those old frameworks and steering directly toward the working class. And we can actually see this top-down messaging applied locally by looking at Michigan Senate candidate Mike Rogers. He paints a pretty stark picture of regional struggles. He claims the state has lost 200,000 manufacturing jobs, suffers from the highest utility rates, and that over half of their fourth graders can't read. He frames this whole situation as a quarter-century of managed decline. But, staying incredibly true to the PAC's new playbook, Rogers doesn't just list out grievances. He takes those local issues and ties them directly to a broader national goal of reshoring manufacturing and returning to industrial strength to actually reverse that decline.
Moving on to Section 2, defining the American system and its historical roots.
To justify this modern campaign strategy, the PAC reaches back a bit into recent history. They reference a flyer that was heavily circulated back in 2025 with a very clear slogan: "A new Republican Party is rising, Main Street, not Wall Street." This phrase basically acts as the anchor for their entire economic platform. They're heavily emphasizing a pivot toward economic nationalism, highlighting tariffs, industry, and infrastructure, while actively distancing themselves from what they view as the old, Wall Street-focused establishment. But how do they actually brand this Main Street approach? Well, they call it the American system, and they ground it by claiming the legacy of some major historical figures. The speaker notes that President Trump has been posting images on social media featuring George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and, very notably, our first Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton. Highlighting Hamilton in particular is a super deliberate and unique branding choice by the PAC. They're using these founding figures to try and break voters out of the tired big government versus little government debate. Instead, they're arguing that their modern policies are a direct continuation of the unique economic system established by these early American leaders.
And that historical branding builds right into their core ideological argument. The PAC draws a very sharp, distinct contrast between two historical economic frameworks. On one side, what they champion as the American system posits that true wealth is generated by the creative power of the human mind acting upon the physical universe. Then they contrast this with what they call the British system. The speaker argues that this opposing system believes wealth isn't actually created, but rather it's just whatever can be extracted, moved around, or, as they pretty bluntly put it, stolen from what already exists. For the PAC, this is not just a history lesson, they see it as the fundamental dividing line between a productive society and a failing one.
Section 3.
the rise of AI-proof jobs, and exactly why manual skills survive automation.
So the absolutely crucial point here, when explaining why these jobs survive, is the concept of tacit knowledge. The PAC relies on a definition from a recent Office of Science and Technology report to explain why human minds will continue to outpace artificial intelligence in certain sectors. They describe tacit knowledge as that deep, process-oriented understanding that just lives in the heads of experienced technicians and engineers. It's the kind of knowledge that's so intuitive and so based on hands-on experience that it simply cannot be fully written down in a manual. And if it can't be written down, it cannot be programmed into an AI. Basically, it's the difference between just reading a recipe and actually being a master chef.
To bring this abstract theory down to earth, the speaker pulls a really great quote directly from that report. They read, "A skilled welder knows things about metal behavior that no manual captures, like the way aluminum warns you before it warps or the sound a good bead makes as it forms." This is just a fantastic illustration for the PAC's argument. They're pointing out that recognizing the subtle sound of metal forming or spotting the visual warning signs of warping aluminum requires a human mind in active dialogue with the physical world. An AI literally cannot hear that bead form the way a master welder does.
And the PAC argues there is a massive financial incentive tied to these exact skills. The speaker references data from apprenticeship.gov, highlighting this number right here, $86,000. That is the average starting salary for these apprenticeship-based skilled trades. The PAC refers to these as six-figure AI-proof jobs. They're using this data to really inspire their base, making the case that the future isn't just about finding any job, but securing highly paid, highly skilled careers that artificial intelligence simply cannot replace.
To back up their claims that this manufacturing renaissance is already underway, the PAC points to physical data. The speaker brings up a website called AmericanFactoryTracker.com, which monitors verified factory investments. We're talking projects where contracts are signed or shovels are literally in the ground. They highlight specific states, noting over 4,500 new jobs in North Carolina and a massive 13,000 jobs in Texas. For the PAC, this data is their proof of concept. It's how they show their audience that the physical return of industry isn't just some theoretical idea. They believe they can track it happening in real time.
Finally, Section 4, Production versus Inflation and the Economic Argument for Physical Production.
During the video, an audience member who actually works full-time in retail asks a super practical question. They ask, will bringing back the American system actually lower high consumer prices? To answer this, the PAC completely discards a major principle of mainstream economics known as the Phillips curve. Now, the Phillips curve generally suggests that rising employment and higher wages inherently lead to higher inflation, which central banks then usually fight by jacking up interest rates. The speaker, however, argues that this whole idea is fundamentally flawed. They claim that if employment is rising because you are adding productive labor, meaning people are actually out there making physical things, it is not inflationary at all, and therefore you absolutely shouldn't need to slam on the economic brakes with high interest rates.
And this brilliantly illustrates the step-by-step logic the PAC uses to claim physical production cures inflation. Step 1. A company invests heavily in a highly skilled workforce and in science and technology. Step 2. Because of that investment, the company radically increases its productive capacity while simultaneously shedding all that unnecessary administrative overhead. Step 3. Thanks to this massive boost in efficiency and output, the company can actually afford to drop consumer prices while still maintaining or even growing its profit margins. The speaker even cites Henry Ford's original model as the historical precedent for this exact process playing out. The speaker then grounds this entire economic theory in a deep sense of historical nostalgia. They point to Detroit in the year 1960. They highlight that in 1960, a per capita income of around $27,000 represented the absolute highest standard of living in the country. Why? Well, according to the speaker, it's because the core activity of the economy back then was physical production. Houses and cars were highly affordable because the supply of manufactured goods was vast and administrative bloat was incredibly low. The PAC uses this $27,000 standard of living benchmark to argue that a return to a production-first economy will naturally drive down the high prices that consumers are suffering from today.
Which leaves us with this final thought. We've seen how Promethean PAC is urging candidates to abandon the old playbook of pure political attacks. Instead, they're pushing a highly specific vision that relies heavily on 19th century American economic theory, the total rejection of modern service sector economics, and a massive investment in AI-proof, hands-on skilled trades. It is a bold, structural pivot designed to directly address voters' everyday economic anxieties. So the ultimate question for you to ponder is this: If this manufacturing-focused strategy truly takes hold over the next 3 months, how significantly will it reshape the modern political landscape in 2026 and beyond? Thank you so much for walking through this explainer with me. I hope this really helped clarify the mechanics behind this political strategy. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I will see you next time.